Alrighty, chat. We should be okay, I think, in terms of everything. Let me see. Let's wait for some people to get in here and to confirm whether or not everything's visible. Let me see if I can even hear myself. Okay, cool. How y'all doing, chat? Welcome back to the stream. I do want to watch this. I was going to watch it personally, but it's a 2-hour-long interview, and honestly, you know, what's better than watching it on your own? Watching it with people. So, might as well. Sergio, thanks for the refollow. How you doing, Dustin? Alright, let me go ahead and let the Discord know. Cat, we talked about this. No. I'm doing good, Dustin. I'm doing good. How are you? Welcome back. Alright. Make sure everything's set up here. I think we're gonna get right on into it. Let's wait for everybody that wants to be here to get in here. And then... See, I've just been wanting to watch this, right? Where'd the cat just go? Aren't you going out? No? What are you doing, bro? What are you doing? Oh, what happened to you, Dustin? You'll be here for a smidge. Alrighty, Emily. Welcome back. Let me finish up my G Fuel here. Need some energy. Need to get a little bit, you know? How you doing, Riley? Welcome back to the stream. Cat, what did I say? Alright. Anyways, I think we're good to start this.
So following is an interview with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shot February 6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most presently, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption.
Jesus, Emily coming with a baby dragon and galaxy right off the bat. Thank you so much, Emily, for the baby dragon freaking galaxy. Hey, yo. W's in the chat for Emily. Always coming in freaking strong. It's all good, Emily. It's all freaking good. You know, interrupt me as much as you want for baby dragons galaxies. All right, chat. Yeah. But let's get back to it, yeah.
But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light, as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable, serious
Так вот, да, это серьезный разговор. Но поскольку у вас базовое
Because your
образование...
basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
Тогда я позволю себе...
So, if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Вот смотрите, с чего началась
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from.
Откуда она взялась?
Where did Ukraine come from?
Российское государство стало
The
собираться
Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood,
годом создания российского государства.
and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862,
Новгород на северо-западе страны.
when the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign.
Варягов. 862 год. В 1800
In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary
Really quickly, guys, if you guys do want to watch like the interview in full screen, there is an option to do so on TikTok. So if you're watching right now, like on the vertical, there should be like a little button somewhere like right over here-ish area, right? And you'll be able to click that, and it'll go vertical, and you'll be able to see the like a much larger picture.
of its statehood.
своей государственности и в Новгороде.
And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the
В
country.
882 году
In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's younger son,
по сути функция регента
because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev.
к этому времени пришел в Киев, отстранил от власти двух братьев,
He ousted two brothers who apparently had
членами дружины Рюрика,
once been members of Rurik's squad.
имея два центра в Киеве и в
One thing that just came to mind, and I do want to mention, I don't know if this is mentioned later, if he mentions it later in the interview or not, but historically, and this is just historically speaking, Kiev used to be the Russian capital, and like Russia as a whole, or even like just the Russian people, were called the Kievian Rus up until the Mongols invaded in, I believe, the 16, maybe it was either the 14 or 1500s, I think. It might have been the 1600s, but somewhere in that period. So lots has changed since then, but it was just something that when I was researching, I found interesting, right? The fact that the capital moved, I think, from Kiev to Moscow way later on in history.
So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod.
Следующая очень значимая дата в истории
The
России.
next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988.
Владимир
This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity.
централизованное российское государство.
From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen.
Единая территория.
Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties,
Один язык.
one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape.
Российское государство.
Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne,
Введение престола наследия.
but after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons.
Чуть-чуть попозже, после того, как он ушел из жизни.
The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines.
Потом сыновьям по разным линиям. Все это привело к
All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state.
раздробленности.
There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe.
Но раздробленное русское государство стало легкой добычей.
But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan.
Хан Баты пришли на Русь.
Yeah, so he's talking about the Mongols invading Russian lands. So Russia used to be not one unified Russia. It used to be Kiev, which was one city-state. It was Moscow was another city-state. St. Petersburg, no, that came later. But you had multiple different city-states, the two main ones being Kiev and Moscow, and those were two completely different countries. Like, they were literally the countries of their own, right? It was one city, and it was like they owned this land, and that was like their one state. And then they would unify against the Mongols when they eventually invade those lands.
Successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities. The southern part, including Kiev, by the way, and some other cities, simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe. This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population. They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state. During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that a person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every possible way, to colonize this part of the Russian lands, and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw demanding that their rights be observed and people be commissioned here, including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period? I'm losing track of where in history we are. The Polish oppression of Ukraine.
It was in the 13th century. Now I will tell you what happened later and give the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, the people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. So that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives, copies. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld. And after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a translation into Russian. You can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the Pan-Russian Assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar,
Часть древнерусских земель вошла
which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part of the old
I'm just gonna go for a comment here that just came in. The earpiece, yeah. So the earpiece that they're both wearing right there, they have translators that they're like going back and forth with, right? And so they fully understand each other. What he's talking about, I feel like wasn't really translated correctly. What he was saying was that the documents that he just gave to Tucker Carlson have a Russian. They are in Russian, and that they can translate them later on their own. But he gave him documents from the archives of Russia on everything that he's talking about right now, i.e., like Russian history, like the different changes in, I guess I would say political borders, especially after the unification of Russia, when the Mongols were going through, or at least he's calling it the horde, or well, yeah, the Mongol horde is moving through the region, and so we're in the 1300s right now, where he's explaining all of this. Now, Tucker's trying to get more into like what happened 2 years ago and why he, started the military operations in Ukraine, and he even said in the beginning of the video, for everyone that's just getting here, Tucker said in the beginning of the video that he thought that this, like him talking about all this, was to like run time, and like he thought that there was like a limit to how long the interview could go, but it ended up being that this interview had no time limit, and that's why it's 2 hours long. So that's why I want to watch it. And me being born in Russia, I was raised in the US though, right? Like I want to understand what's going on, right? I want to see really just like, one, Russian history, very interesting to me, and two, a Western based media or interviewer I don't think has ever interviewed a Russian president. So this is like pretty big.
Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia. And the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in Poland. Under the rule of Catherine the Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west. This all lasted until the revolution. Before World War I, Austrian General Staff relied on the ideas of Ukrainianization and started actively promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization. Their motive was obvious. Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which had emerged in Poland, that people residing in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff. As far back as the 19th century, theorists calling for Ukrainian independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia. They insisted on that. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood, and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland.
I do want to say, because I see like something's coming up in the chat, Tucker's no longer with Fox News. Fox News dropped him a while back, and now he has his own news network, which is, I'm pretty sure it's quite literally called Tucker Carlson News, or Tucker Carlson Network. And so most of his stuff has been on Twitter and stuff like that. Like, you've seen him around, right? But his interviews are interesting, right? Just because, what did the dude have to do to get a 2-hour-long interview with Putin? Like, I'm just saying, like, sheesh, right? Hasn't been done before. There it is.
по которым западные
In 1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed, and under
No, Chris, it happened like literally last year.
that treaty, the right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland.
в 1939
In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler,
сотрудничала с Гитлером, а Польша сотрудничала.
it did collaborate with Hitler, you know? Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship,
В архивах есть. Предлагал с Польшей
an alliance demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg.
основную часть Германии с Кёнигсбергом и с Восточной Пруссией.
After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Dansk emerged.
И вместо Данцига появился.
Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
Of course.
Still, they collaborated with Hitler and engaged together
И вместе занялись
in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
But may I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land, why did you wait so long?
Ща- Да, щас
I'll
скажу.
tell you,
Я щас скажу.
I'm
Я
coming to
заканчиваю
that.
эту историческую справку.
this briefing is coming to an end. It might be boring, but it
not
explains
boring.
many
I
things.
just don't know how it's relevant.
Ну, отлично, тогда мне очень
Good.
приятно, что вы так это оценили.
Good.
Спасибо большое.
I'm so
Итак,
gratified that you appreciate that.
после,
Thank you.
перед Второй мировой
So,
войной,
before
когда
World
Польша
War II,
сотрудничала с
Poland
Германией,
collaborated with
оказалось,
Hitler,
что требования
and
Гитлера,
although
но тем
it
не
did
менее
not yield to
участвовали в
Hitler's demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany
начать Вторую
and
мировую
went too
войну.
far,
Именно
pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them.
1939 года именно с
Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September
при
1939?
реализации его планов.
Poland turned out to be uncompromising, and Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland.
И Советский Союз
By the way, the USSR, I have read some archive documents, behaved very honestly.
свои войска на помощь Чехословакии.
It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia.
Было сказано, что если даже советские
But
самолеты
the then Polish foreign minister said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be downed over the territory of Poland.
война началась,
But that
и
doesn't
теперь
matter.
уже сама
What matters
Польша
is that the
стала
war
жертвой
began,
той
and
политики,
Poland
которую
fell prey to the
проводила
policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, as under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
территории отошла
Part of the territory
I see what's happening, like, with what people are saying in the comments, with Tucker being passive-aggressive. Once again, he even said, like, in the very beginning of this interview and of this video that he thought that this was a... Hold on, we're at 1541. For all the people that are just new here, just real quick. We were at
6,
1541.
2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us,
Just
which
listen to
is,
what he
of
says.
course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we
Right
asked
here.
the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted
Right
him
there.
several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine.
So that right there, right? And
So our opinion would be to view it in that light as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is.
right. So as you can see right there, he thought it was a filibuster technique, and that's why he kept on, interrupting him and trying to get, down to what he was there for. But it ended up not being that, right? So Tony had not what he was actually saying. Wait, huh? Explain. Hold on, and give me a second here. 1548, where we were at. There we go. All right. Chat, I need to go take a restroom break real quick. Did I get my XXXLL coffee? You're coming in from that video? That thing was posted like a month ago, dude. I don't know. Sheesh. But I have been having a lot of like hydration, so I do need to go and take a leak. So I will be right back. Don't be a goldfish. If you guys want to keep on watching this interview with everybody that's in here, you know, just stick around for the next, like, I'm only going to be on for like 30 seconds. So just give me a second. I'll be right back. And yeah, see you guys in a second. I see. Well, I mean, to be fair, it is an interview, right? I feel like he has a little bit more leeway in terms of like the way that the interview goes, right? Because it is Tucker's interview with him, right? So I feel like it's a mutual respect. Gee, why are there 44 people in here? Hi. Yeah, I literally went to go use the restroom, and all of a sudden, all these people are in here. Hi there. We're 15 minutes into the interview, so stick around. Let's get back into it. That was a surprise. Anyways.
Ukraine was to be given to Russia. Thus, Russia, which was then named the USSR, regained its historical lands. After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II, all those territories were ultimately enshrined as belonging to Russia, to the USSR.
And really quickly for everyone that's just joining in, if you guys want to watch this on like a larger screen, not on a larger screen, but just like, you know, actually see the video larger, go ahead and there is a feature somewhere right over here on TikTok where you can actually like click it to turn your screen over, just like a YouTube video, and the layout is different there, so you'll be able to watch the interview without, you know, having to see chat at the bottom and all that other stuff. So I thought I'd just throw that out there. But welcome in.
As for Poland, it received, apparently in compensation, the lands which had originally been German. The eastern parts of Germany, these are now western lands of Poland. Of course, Poland regained access to the Baltic Sea and Danzig,
который опять стал называться.
which was once again given its Polish name.
Вот таким образом сложилось.
So this was how this situation
При
developed.
формировании Советского Союза, это уже 1900,
In 1922, when the USSR was being established,
большевики начали формировать
the
СССР.
Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
Right.
Который до сих пор вообще не существовал. При этом Сталин
Stalin insisted that those republics be included in the USSR as
входили в качестве автономных
autonomous entities.
Основатель советского государства Ленин настоял.
For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR.
Наделил
And
образующуюся
again, for some unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine, and yet they were made part of that Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever. Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the
In
question.
1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
Да. Итак, значит, советская Украина получила
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it, including
So really quick in the translation, it doesn't really show that he says like anyways. So like he's listening to the translation, right? Like the earpieces they have, he's listening to the translation. And the one thing that they didn't include right just now, like as he was speaking, was as Tucker Carlson was talking just now, he was saying he was saying even though, like even like, how do I explain it? It's so hard to translate. He's like, in spite of that, I feel like he's about to, so I feel like that's a better translation, like in spite of that, and then he's going to continue here.
the Black Sea region.
когда
Yeah, I do understand Russian. I was born in Russia. My mom is Russian, and I was raised in the U.S., but like this is why this is so interesting to me personally, is because, one, the background in Russian history, I am really enjoying it. I did my own research on a lot of these things a while back, just because I was curious. But also because there's never been a Western media, I don't think Western media has ever interviewed one-on-one with a Russian president. And I feel like this is a very interesting scenario. And so it'll be interesting to see what Tucker's interpretation of the interview is, right, as it goes along.
Россия их получила в результате
At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars,
Новороссии.
they were called New Russia or Novorossiya.
Ленин, основатель
But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state,
И вот это все
established Ukraine that way.
в составе СССР
For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR,
по непонятным причинам занимались
and for unknown reasons again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed to a great extent of those originating from Ukraine.
Украины и других
Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics. This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not a bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away and given to the Soviet Ukraine, and they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
That's a really good question. It's gonna be an interesting answer. That is a really good question.
Ну, я не знаю, как границам.
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders.
Все считают, что
But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which as many claim saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states,
то в этом смысле, конечно, вполне можно, ну, если не говорить о том, что они имеют на это право.
one may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs.
Okay, I don't know how he's about to translate it, but what he said in Russian was, of course, like, just how he feels about it, or he truly feels like those original borders are, like, they would have the right to go and take them back, but he's not saying that they have the right to, but if they wanted to, then they would have a case, is the best way that I can translate what he just said. Let's see what the translator says, though.
Well, having no right to do that, it is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Никогда не говорил.
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
У нас с ним даже на этот счет не было никаких разговоров. Но мне достоверно.
We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there
Они, конечно, хотят вернуться на свою историю.
wanted to get back to their historical land.
Интересную историю. Отвлекусь.
Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you.
Значит, где-то в начале
I digress, it's a personal one.
из,
Somewhere in the early 80s, I went on a road trip in a car from then Leningrad across the Soviet Union through Kiev,
выехал
made a stop in Kiev, and then went to western Ukraine.
название
I went to the town of Beregovoye,
и
and all the names of towns and villages there were in Russian and in the language.
This is not inherently political. This is an interview. This is somewhere where you can get information on how another side feels about a certain situation, right? These types of interviews are critical for conversation or even peace as a whole to be had. Because to understand truly what somebody else thinks, that is how you can either build an argument against it or you can come to an agreement.
Which I did not understand, in Hungarian, in Russian and in Hungarian,
возле
not in Ukrainian, in Russian and in Hungarian. I was driving through some kind of village and there were men sitting next to the houses and they were wearing black three-piece suits and black cylinder hats. I asked, are they some kind of entertainers? I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here. This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They are Hungarians and they feel themselves to be Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement.
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations, they're upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today,
Сейчас скажу.
you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk, so bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and everything that Russia had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter.
подхожу сейчас к очень важному
I'm
моменту.
coming to a very important point of today's agenda.
Этот развал Советского Союза.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian
Я не
leadership.
знаю, чем тогда руководствовалось руководство России. Но
I do not understand
подозреваю,
what the Russian
что из
leadership was guided by at the time, but I
э,
suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine.
Первое. Ну, во-первых, я думаю, что руководство России исходило из того, что
First,
фундаментальные
I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian.
У каждого третьего какие-то родственные связи.
Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies.
Экономика очень сильно взаимосвязана.
All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable.
Я хочу, чтобы вы, как американские гражданины, чтобы
The second point is a very important one.
прежнее российское руководство
I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well.
больше никаких разделителей.
The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines.
Инициативно пошла даже на развал Советского Союза.
Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet
Так
Union,
называемым
and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West
союзничества.
as an invitation for cooperation and
Вот чего
association.
ожидала Россия.
That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole.
В том числе и в Германии. Эгон Барр.
There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party.
Once again, this right here, this interview is not inherently political. An interview is question and answer. It's a Q&A, right? It's a great way to understand more about the other side. It's a great way to understand more about the conflict in general. It's a great way to understand the thought process of Putin in this situation, right? And once again, it hasn't been done before. Western media has not interviewed Putin one-on-one before.
Who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet.
This conversation, this interview is only political if you make it political. It might be on the topic, right? But for something to be inherently political, it has to be dividing. Nothing about this is dividing. Actually, it's the opposite, right?
Leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union, that a new security system should be established in Europe.
Помочь объединиться Германии, но
Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all.
Больше того, он рассердился как-то.
He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once.
Рассердился на советское руководство.
If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again.
Но, тем не менее,
Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point, and many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said,
Wait a minute. Does this live have a warning on it to learn more about US elections? Okay.
You know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive, I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
Hold on, before they continue. That's an interesting point of view. The fact that Putin said that had Bill Clinton's, as president, when he spoke to him, said yes, Russia may have joined NATO. That's a very interesting thing to hear from the Russian president, right? And I don't think that's something that's actually been heard before in Western media anywhere. So this is definitely, I mean, like I said, this just reinforces how important these types of interviews are, and for people to watch them, and for people to understand them, and for people to leave their political views at the door almost before watching interviews like these, right? Because you want to be able to be open-minded in what these other people are thinking, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all human. At the end of the day, we all might have differing opinions, but to understand one another is the only way towards peace and or towards negotiation that leads to an agreement.
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on.
Charlie, Tucker Carlson is no longer part of the Fox News network. He is independent. He actually got fired by Fox about a year ago.
And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say anything new. Nevertheless, after that we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus. But they continue to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, "It's impossible. Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? I apologize, but that's what happened. I'll quote. He says, "Well, I'm gonna kick their ass." We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, "Write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President?" He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, "We have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it." Just ridiculous. Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government?
Of course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus. That's who they called the opposition. This is the second point. The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the US missile defense system was created. The beginning. We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States. Moreover, after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean, I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team. I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that, we believe, if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
May I ask, what year was this?
I don't remember. It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of a Bush senior. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Okay, that is extremely interesting. The fact that Putin just said that he recommended that Europe, the USA, and Russia work together on a missile defense system against Iran, and that it didn't really lead to more talks. It's like the second point that he's made, or at least the second thing that he said during this interview that has been kind of like, I didn't know that. I feel like a lot of people didn't know that. That's very interesting.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just...
And to the people that are, once again, trying to make it political, being like, yeah, but can we really believe that? Take politics out of the question, right? No matter what you think of Putin, no matter what you think of, our government, whatever, right? Can we really trust any type of government? At all? Do we really know 100% everything that's going on 24/7 in any type of government ever? Right? The US government's going to keep things from us that they think we don't need to know, or they think will harm them in some way. So will the Russian government, right? To their people. But then once again, that's why this interview is insane. Like, insanely insightful. Because you're getting the Western media, and a Russian president into an interview. And all of a sudden, these conversations that are happening, all of a sudden you're hearing things that you've never heard before. Now, are they correct? Are they right? Are they... can they be verified? Right now, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that now you can do research on it. Now you can go and fact check. Now you can look in a corner that you haven't looked at before. Right?
Imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together. The world would change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says yes, and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told. I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side. They said to me, "Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great, but with some exceptions."
So twice you've described US presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who were elected, in your telling.
That's right, that's right. In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential conversation. But our proposal was declined. That's a fact. It was right then when I said, "Look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures. We will create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems." The answer was, "We are not doing this against you, and you do what you want," assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States. I said, "Okay. Very well." That's the way it went. And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed
Теперь
back.
по поводу расширения НАТО на восток.
Now,
Ну,
about
обещали.
NATO's expansion to the
Никакого
east.
НАТО на восток.
This is not an interview that's against the US. It's not an interview that's for Russia. It's not even an interview that is for or against the war in Ukraine. It's literally just an interview. The interviewer is sitting there and he's listening to exactly what Putin's side of the story is, what he believes it is, or at least what he is saying that it is, right? Once again, it's up to us to fact check. It is up to us to go and research all these things and make sure that everything that was said is truthful. So make sure you do that, right? And I'm sure, especially because this literally only dropped 8 hours ago, there's going to be many, many people that go out of their way to go and fact check everything. But for the people in the comments right now that are saying, oh, but you're listening to, or like you're lapping up what the head of the Russian state is saying, I believe is what one of the comments said. That's not what we're doing. That's not what I'm doing. I'm listening to one side of the story. I've heard the Western side of, all of the media, all of everything, even like on every single news network in the US, I've seen something about the Ukraine war. I've seen something about the conflict, right? I haven't been able to find a source that was reliable from the Russian perspective. And I feel like this is extremely important to know, right? Because at the end of the day, if we're only fed one side of the story, and then we are taught to hate another side, are we any better than what happened in World War I, what happened in World War II, what happened in any major conflict between countries, either via religion, differing opinions, etc.? You have to take in both sides, and then you have to make your own opinion. You have to think on your own. Don't just listen to things. Yes, listen and take that information in, but then process it on your own without outside factors. I just totally blanked on the word. Outside factors. I'm just going to say outside factors tainting it in a way, right?
Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what?
Что сказать? Ну,
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand.
5 расширений.
So there were 5 waves of expansion: the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on.
И вот теперь прихожу к главному.
And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later, he exerted pressure on us and we had to
Он на
agree.
нас нажал.
For everyone that wants the video or the screen to be bigger, go ahead and there is a feature somewhere right over here. I'm pretty sure it's on your right side. It's like a little box with like holes in it kind of thing. If you click on that, your phone screen will turn and it'll be like a YouTube video. So my camera's a lot smaller over here. It's on the left side and the chat is barely visible. So you'll be able to see more of the video. So that's a new TikTok feature. You guys can use that and you'll be able to see it in a lot larger of a screen.
It's ridiculous. It's like kindergarten.
Вот смешно.
Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten
Где
is
гарантия-то
this?
просто?
What kind of people are these? Who are they?
Кто они такие?
You see, they were pressed, they agreed.
А потом они говорят,
And then they say Ukraine won't be in.
And correct, you can also turn chat off by swiping to the right. If you swipe to the right, you're going to turn off the chat, you're going to turn off all the stuff that's up here, and it'll be a clear picture.
The NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future?
я говорю, а почему завтра?
Well, they pressed us then. I say, why won't they?
Okay, that translation was wrong. He said, he didn't say, why won't you agree in the future? He said, why won't you agree tomorrow? You'll agree today, but why won't you agree tomorrow? I don't know why that translation was off, but it was.
Press you tomorrow, and you'll agree again.
С кем там
Well,
разговаривать?
it's nonsensical.
Мы готовы
Who's
к
there to
разговору.
talk
С
to?
кем?
I just don't
Где
understand.
гарантии?
We're ready to talk. But with whom?
Значит, начали осваивать
Where are the guarantees?
Что бы
None.
не было там. Я вам
So they
много
started to
сказал.
develop the territory of Ukraine.
Это территория.
Whatever is there, I have told you the background, how this territory developed, what kind of relations there were with Russia.
И
Every
при выборах
second or third
уже
person there has
зависит
always had
от
some ties with
суверенного
Russia.
Украины, которая получила
And during the elections in already independent, sovereign Ukraine, which gained its independence as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, it says that Ukraine is a neutral state, and in 2008, suddenly the doors or gates to NATO were open to it. Oh, come on.
Так вот,
This is not how we agreed.
все,
Now, all the presidents that have come to power in Ukraine,
опирались на
they relied on electorate with a good attitude to Russia in one way or the other.
это юго-восток Украины.
This is the southeast of Ukraine. This is a large number of people.
И перебить этот электорат.
And it was very difficult to dissuade this electorate, which had a positive attitude towards Russia.
Значит, к власти пришел
Viktor Yanukovych came to power, and how?
первый раз он победил,
The first time he won after President Kuchma, they organized a third round, which is not provided for in the constitution of Ukraine.
госпереворот.
This is a coup d'etat.
Себе
Just imagine, someone in the United States wouldn't like the outcome.
между...
In 2014,
Нет,
Before that,
нет, нет.
no, this
Really quickly, yeah, I do speak Russian. And I was actually born in Russia, but I was raised in the US, right? So I have a very interesting viewpoint on all of this, right? It's like, yeah, my heritage is in Russia, but at the end of the day, my loyalty mostly lies to the US, or actually pretty much in full lies to the US because I was raised here. I became a citizen here. My entire life is here, right? So I do understand everything, and at the same time, whether it be Western politics, whether it be foreign politics, whether it be somewhere in between, I want to see both sides of the story. I want to understand both sides of the story. And then I want to take that in on my own, personally process that information on my own with my own viewpoints and my own thought process, and then make a decision on it, rather than relying on one source of information or one side of the information and then going off of that. That's what I believe in, and that's why I'm streaming this today, and that's why I'm trying to show this to as many people as possible, because this dropped 8 hours ago, and once again, never before, I don't think, at least not in my lifetime, has any type of Western media interviewed a Russian president, or, you know, I don't think any Western media ever interviewed anybody from the USSR, for example. I think it's never happened like this, where it's been this public, where it's been unedited, where it's been just thrown out there, and, you know, you make your own opinion about it.
It was before that, after President Kuchma, Viktor Yanukovych won the elections. However, his opponents did not recognize that victory. The US supported the opposition, and the third round was scheduled.
США поддержали
What is this? This is a
назначили
coup.
третий тур.
The US supported it, and the winner of the third round came to power.
Это государственный переворот.
Imagine if in the US something was not to someone's liking, and the third round of election, which the US Constitution does not provide for, was organized.
Организовали третий.
Nonetheless, it was done in Ukraine.
Не предусмотрено.
Okay, Viktor Yushchenko, who was considered a pro-Western politician, came to power.
Виктор Ющенко, который считался прозападным.
Fine, we have built relations with him as well. He came to Moscow with visits.
Москву с визитами.
We visited Kiev. I visited too.
Встречались неформально.
We met in an informal setting. If he's pro-Western, so be it. It's fine. Let people do their job.
Пускай
The
ситуация
situation should have developed inside the independent Ukraine itself. As a result of Kuchma's leadership, things got worse and Viktor Yanukovych came to power after all.
ситуация ухудшилась.
Maybe he wasn't the best president and politician, I don't know. I don't want to give assessments. However, the issue of the association with the EU came up.
Но встал вопрос об ассоциации с Евросоюзом.
We have always
For whoever's asking, you can find this on YouTube. This is a YouTube video. This is on YouTube. This is on Twitter. This is everywhere. Just look it up and you'll be able to find it. You can go minute by minute as you wish. It's everywhere. This isn't just like to one platform or anything like that.
been lenient to this. Suit yourself. But when we read through the Treaty of Association, it turned out to be a problem for us, since we had a free trade zone and open customs borders with Ukraine, which under this association had to open its borders for Europe, which could have led to flooding of our market. We said, no, this is not going to work. We shall close our borders with Ukraine then. The customs borders, that is. Yanukovych started to calculate how much Ukraine was going to gain, how much to lose, and said to his European partners, I need more time to think before signing. The moment he said that, the opposition began to take destructive steps which were supported by the West. It all came down to Maidan and a coup in Ukraine.
So he did more trade with Russia than with the EU. Ukraine did.
Of course. It's not even the matter of trade volume, although for the most part it is. It is the matter of cooperation ties, which the entire Ukrainian economy was based on. The cooperation ties between the enterprises were very close since the times of the Soviet Union. One enterprise there used to produce components to be assembled both in Russia and Ukraine, and vice versa. They used to be very close ties. A coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate, the US told us. Calm Yanukovych down, and we will calm the opposition. Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a political settlement. We said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev. What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are? I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand. We should thank God they didn't let you in.
Did anybody know that about Tucker? Is it just me, like, first time hearing this about him? That's interesting. Huh.
Although, it is a serious organization. I understand. My former vis-a-vis in the sense that I served in the first main directorate, Soviet Union's intelligence service. They have always been our opponents. A job is a job. Technically, they did everything right. They achieved their goal of changing the government. However, from political standpoint, it was a colossal mistake. Surely it was political leadership's miscalculation. They should have seen what it would evolve into. So, in 2008, the doors of NATO were opened for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbas in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There's a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above.
I can see the chat's getting a little out of hand, so I'm going to say it one more time, guys. Take all of your political views, take everything, just like, and throw it in the trash for a second, right? Just leave it there, right? Or not in the trash, just put it in a box. Put it in a box, stow it away for a little bit, and just listen to the information. No matter who it's coming from, no matter what type of interview this is, the point is that Western media got an interview with Putin. That hasn't been done before. Just listen to the story. Listen to this side of events, and then take both sides that you know of and make your own opinion on it. This is what this is for. There's no need to go crazy in the chat. There's no need to go crazy in the comments with this and this and this, and oh, this is personal about Tucker, and oh, this is personal about Putin, or I feel this way about him, and I feel this way about him. Just take the information in, right? Process it. Give yourself time to process it. Don't let hate or the instant gratification of saying something, I would say, like, on fire, over your own ability to make your own opinion, right? Don't regurgitate. Take things in, digest them, and then make your own opinion about them. Process them.
They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the US political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. Besides, we could not leave our brothers in faith, in fact, a part of Russian people, in the face.
Really quickly, Stefan, I'm not saying that you having an opinion in the chat is ruining you having an opinion or whatever. You very clearly stated that your birthday being on the same as Tucker Carlson's ruined your birthday. That's not even political. That's not even an opinion. That's just you being personal. That's emotional. Really, that is literally just emotional. Like I said, instead of focusing on who it's coming from or what it's coming from, just take it in. Take it in, process it, digest it. If you think it's BS, then great. You think it's BS, throw it out. Go find other information. Go fact check it. Go look into what they're talking about. Don't instantly assume that something is incorrect or wrong or isn't a fact just because it's coming from someone's mouth that, well, you don't trust or you have a bad opinion about. Because you don't really know until you go and do the research on your own.
Of this war machine.
But that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Спровоцировал конфликт изначально.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement. They just threw it in the stove.
We do have mods in the chat. I can see stuff happening. It's just the chat's going a little too quick for them right now. There's a lot of people in here, so if some stuff gets through, I apologize, guys.
Right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the US know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities, and its 3 guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me, because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions. He was ready to hold an early election, which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbas? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost 5 billion. But the political mistake was colossal. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan. Because we agreed with the fact that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, our borders should be along the borders of former Union's republics. We agreed to that. But we never agreed to NATO's expansion, and moreover, we never agreed that Ukraine would be in NATO. We did not agree to NATO bases there without any discussion with us. For decades, we kept asking, don't do this, don't do that. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbas was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to get...
Really quickly, just to address some things in the chat. Putin has an earpiece to translate what Tucker's saying in English into Russian, because even though Putin doesn't understand English, I feel like he understands a lot better in Russian. He wants to make sure that this is a quality interview. I don't know if Tucker has a small earpiece and like a wireless one, right? I'm pretty sure I think they have different teams for this stuff, right? They have different teams for this stuff. And Emily, thank you for the freaking gem gun. But they have different teams, right? Obviously, like, Tucker's team isn't going to put an earpiece on Putin. That's going to be his own personal security. And then as for, let's see, what else was asked? Yes. So about history. For the first 30 minutes of this interview, Putin went through the entire history of pretty much Russia, the Kievan Rus, which it's where Russia originated, right? Capital in Kiev, Kiev being a city-state, being Kievan Rus, and then Moscow eventually was its own city-state after they split apart. But then after the... One second. Okay, there we go. After the Mongols invaded, right, they came back together under one unified Russia to either, one, drive them back, and or two, ensure the sovereignty of their own city-states, which he went through in the first 30 minutes of this interview. And if you guys want to go watch that, literally just look up the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin on YouTube, anywhere, Twitter, YouTube, I don't know what other platforms he's on, but you guys can look that up and you guys can watch that first 30 minutes if you guys are truly interested in that history. But yeah, I just wanted to address that in the chat because I know there's a lot of new people coming in that didn't get to see that part.
This is going to be we're going to act.
Мы постоянно об этом говорили.
We talked about this all the time. We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements. Frankly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to do this, but I was ready to implement them. These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbas territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbas, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place. No, nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only. But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Do you think you've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet, because one of them is denazification. This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year. And it was not our initiative, because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents. My counterparts in France and Germany said,
Германия говорили, ну как ты себе представляешь, как они будут подписывать?
how can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev. I said, all right. We withdrew the troops from Kiev.
Извините, от Киева.
As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin
Договоренности, достигнутые в Стамбуле.
and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe.
Вот.
That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
Да.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean? What is,
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification.
Искать, как говорят некоторые.
After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search as some.
So, by the way, for everyone in the chat, someone just said, how do we know it's an accurate translation? When I hear something that's incorrect, then I will translate it. I am Russian. I speak Russian. I was born in Russia. I was raised in Houston, Texas. Don't get me wrong. Right? So, obviously, I'm going to be a little bit more biased to the American side of things. But, I usually stop it and I translate it. But everything here has been very correct in most parts, aside from like once or twice where I've had to stop it and like correct it a little bit. But it's just mostly a difference in, I would say like difference in pronunciation rather than like a difference in the way it's translated. But it's just the way that they pronounce some things, or in English as the translation to Russian isn't exactly right. It's a little complicated, but you get my point. You get my point. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going.
Western analysts say its identity.
Во главу угла этой идентичности.
And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler.
Которые сотрудничали с Гитлером. Я уже говорил, что
I have already said that in the early 19th century, when the theorists of independence and sovereignty of Ukraine appeared, they assumed that an independent Ukraine should have very good relations with Russia.
Но в силу исторического развития.
But due to the historical development, those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted and treated quite brutally, as well as were subject to cruel behavior.
Идентичность. Вели себя очень жестоко. Это все осталось в памяти.
There were also attempts to destroy their identity.
Когда началась Вторая мировая война, часть этой.
All this remained in the memory of the people. When World War II broke out, part of this extremely nationalist elite collaborated with Hitler, believing that he would bring them freedom.
Она начала сотрудничать с Гитлером, полагая, что
The German troops, even the SS troops, made Hitler's collaborators do the dirtiest work of exterminating the Polish and Jewish population. Hence this brutal massacre of the Polish and Jewish population, as well as the Russian population too.
которые с Гитлером сотрудничали. Вот отсюда вот эта жестокая резня.
This was led by the persons who are well known, Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem. And we are constantly.
I know that a lot of people in chat right now are being like, oh, this person's lying, or that person's lying, or whatever, right? Like I said, go fact check it, do your own research, 100%, please. But an interview, at the end of the day, this is his truth, right? And I know we talk a lot about that, especially in the U.S., like what's your truth, right? We're listening to their version of the truth, right? I've heard the Western side a lot. We've all heard the Western side a lot. We haven't heard anything like this. So I'm just asking y'all to take it in, fact check the hell out of it, digest it, make your own opinions. It is a huge, huge portion of one, making peace and understanding one another in any situation, right? And two, for a continual understanding and mutual understanding of each side, right? Because at the end of the day, when that communication breaks down if these types of interviews don't happen, if this type of conversation doesn't happen in our society, that's when things start to break. That's when things start to fall. That's when people start getting angry, not understanding the other side, and all of a sudden now we have more wars than we started with. We have more conflict than we started with. We have more hate than we started with. So just take everything in, right? Don't just flow naturally to one side or whatever it may be, right? Just take everything in, take it with a grain of salt, right? Analyze it, fact check it, and then form your own opinion about it. Don't listen to others' opinion about it. Just form your own.
Told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we uproot them, and other countries fight against them. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected. They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany. These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев и русских.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people. They say, no, we are a separate people. Okay, fine. If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Нет, сейчас закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification.
Замалчивается на Западе.
Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries.
Спикер парламента.
The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II? Hitler and his accomplices. It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews. The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism, but how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very subtle,
Скажу, как я думаю.
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий. Он очень противный, этот вопрос.
This
Okay, he's not saying that the question is very subtle. Once again, there's not really a translation for this, but when you're saying твой вопрос очень тонкий, it's like your question is very I'd say like not closed-minded, but very narrow. Like your question is very narrow. It's to a very a very specific point without like looking at the broad, like you know what I'm talking about. And what he just said after that, before this translator says anything, is that it's a very narrow question, and he said it's a very not disgusting, but it's like a vile question. Is what he just said. I'm not sure how this translator is about to translate this, but that's pretty much what Putin just said.
question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
It's definitely that pesky was definitely not the right translation. It's more like vile. But
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years, 80 years. But his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive. And the president, the current president of today's Ukraine, applauds him in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is. That is what we mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country.
Whoever just said that they're not going to translate completely because of the Russian government, that's not 100% true. It's just the way that you say certain things in Russian with enunciation or without enunciation, or with or without like a certain tone to it. Like we have strogi znak and mягкий znak, which is like a hard sound or a soft sound, kind of dictates what a word that sounds exactly the same actually means. And then different translators will have different viewpoints on exactly what that word means rather than another translator. So whatever translator they're using is either not like native Russian or is native Russian but hasn't like lived in the US to understand fully what certain words mean, if that makes sense.
You don't control Kiev, you don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вот знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле...
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carlson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? That is it.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine, peace talks?
Они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций, сложно.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how...
No, I'm sorry, yes. I'm not getting upset or anything like that. If you see me like smiling or going like this, because I'm like trying to contain myself from smiling, because this is a lot of people watching, and I looked at the video that I made about me doing this, and it has a lot of views, and I'm just over here like trying to contain myself to make sure to, keep this show going. So I'm just going to continue.
How are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special...
I feel like that was extremely passive-aggressive by Tucker there. It was funny, don't get me wrong. It was very funny. But I feel like that one, I don't know, I don't know if that's just me, chat. That was extremely passive-aggressive. Like, the dude's got nuts. You know, that's all I'm gonna say. The dude's got nuts for doing that.
Military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
By the way, really quickly, this is one thing I am noticing about this specific translator for this interview. He's being very formal about everything. This conversation is not that formal. Even Putin is not being formal about anything. Instead of him saying, we still have contact in certain cases or certain regards or in certain ways, he literally said, but, you know, we still keep contact casually, pretty much. That's exactly what he said. Like, on the dot, he's being super casual about everything. The interviewer is being 100% formal in business in the way that he's translating things. So just keep that in mind.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound. And I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here, if you are interested in what...
Since the chat, I guess there's a lot of new people coming in. Yes, I do speak Russian. I was born in Russia. I was raised in Houston, Texas. But I do still speak Russian. Me and my mom speak Russian natively, like in the house. So I do understand. If there was no translator, I would understand what he's saying. But because there is a translator, I do correct some things that he says, just because the way that he's translating it is very, like I said, it's very business. But just like you have like in Spanish or in other languages, you have things that are like, you say it very harshly or you say it very softly, and that determines the intent of the word, and then it'll translate differently in English based on that. So I feel like whoever was translating this, either he was told to be 100% professional, or he just kind of defaults to that out of respect or whatever it might have been. But I'm just kind of like coming in and you know, dissecting everything, because right now it feels like both of them, or it feels like Tucker's being very casual. In just the English translation, it feels like Tucker's being very casual and Putin's being very stern and very formal about everything. He's not. He's being super casual about everything. Like they're talking almost as if they're friends, if that makes sense.
Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
And that's a good point. If you guys are watching a stream about it, I'm going to pause. I'm going to give my my input about it. I'm going to answer chat's questions. I'm going to be as interactive as I can be, even though I'm watching somebody else's content. If you guys want to go watch this on your own, literally go to YouTube, right, and search up to the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin. You'll be able to find it. You can go through it on your own, dissect it on your own. You may do so. If you guys would like to stick around for, well, quite literally the pauses, the corrections in translations, the answers to the chat, then stick around, right? And by the way, this is the largest stream I've ever had in my entire life. The fact that there's 1,000 people watching this is insane to me, and I'm kind of dumbfounded. So I'm trying my best here to keep my composure. I really got to go take a leak, like really, really bad, but I don't want to stop the stream, so I'm just going to keep going. And yeah, thank you guys for being here.
It's there to work out. It's very simple. I repeat,
Есть контакты по линии там различных.
we have contacts through various agencies.
Я вам скажу, что мы говорим на эту тему.
I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership.
Боевые.
If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it.
Тогда можно договориться.
And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop.
Чем мне звонить?
What's easier? Why would I call him?
Или
What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what
вы
messages do you
собираетесь
get back?
поставить так?
The issue is I personally haven't watched this interview myself yet. So if I just leave it playing and then go to the restroom and come back, then I'm missing out on something, and I really don't want to miss out on things. Just like you guys are still in the chat and watching this with me, like you don't want to leave, and like you know what I mean? Like it's the same thing. It's the same thing. But I can't pause. There's 1,000 people in here. I can't keep everybody in here waiting. So
Такое-то оружие.
I'll do it. Okay. I'll
You're
take the
going
advice.
to
I'll be right back,
deliver
chat.
such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid. Please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people understand perfectly well that this is a fake.
Раздувается.
They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Только в одном случае, если со стороны.
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why?
Поэтому
Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else.
нигде.
Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest.
Интерес. В одних
It's just threat mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine, he has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the
Не надо
question.
быть никаким аналитиком.
You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
Вот. И есть, конечно, средства.
There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow Russia will use that.
Россию
No, the day after tomorrow. So what?
выбить из налогоплательщиков
In order to
США
extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war.
как можно.
Chat, really quickly, I'm gonna keep playing it, but just tell me what I missed while I was gone, please, because that was like the longest leak of my... Never mind. I'm gonna not say that in front of 1,000 people.
The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
What,
You want me to rewind? Really quick, if you want me to rewind, just say rewind real quick, and I'll rewind like a minute. Just real quick, just in the chat. Just if we could say rewind, we're good. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll rewind. Like okay. We're at 109. We'll go 109.38. We'll do like right here somewhere.
can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Thank you guys.
Только в одном случае, если со стороны.
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why?
Поэтому
Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else.
нигде.
Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest.
Интерес. В одних
It's just threat mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine, he has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally.
Okay, I'm very confused. Y'all are still saying rewind. Is it more? What is going on here? This is like a chat that is quicker than I've ever seen in my entire life, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm gonna be totally honest with y'all. Yes, yeah, no, yes, no. I can't fucking tell. Okay, you know, Jesus Christ. You know what? We're gonna try something. We're gonna try real quick. You know, this is what this is for. All right, freaking smiley face if it's good, crying face if it's a little more. There you go. Smiley face if it's good, crying face if it's a little more. There you go. This is what this shit is for. All right, I'm literally only gonna do it for like 5 seconds. Like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, 100 freaking people. There we go. Stop. All right, boom. Let's go.
Don't.
Это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
Вот. И есть, конечно, средства.
There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow Russia will use that. No, the day after tomorrow. So what?
Выбить из налогоплательщиков
In order to extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war. The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort, or U.S. soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
Thank you for the roses, guys.
Это провокация.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that.
Американские солдаты должны воевать.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place and mercenaries from Georgia in third place.
Безусловно.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for?
Национальной территории. У вас нечем заниматься.
Thousands of miles away from your national territory.
На границе полно. Проблемы с
Don't you have anything better to do?
с государством.
You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine?
Понимая ситуацию, которая складывается.
Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end?
К здравому смыслу.
And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions.
Кажется, что это гораздо умнее.
It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up
То есть
Nord
у вас-
Stream.
у
Thank
вас-
you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби. У вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Я не-
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Вы знаете, я не
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion.
Okay, from what I heard, he wasn't saying who has the capabilities. He literally said, once again, this translator is being extremely formal about everything that he's saying. Putin literally just said, instead of looking at, you know, who it was or whatever exactly he just said, it's who can, not who has the capabilities. It's we should be looking at who can. That's what he said. Can. He didn't say capabilities. Capabilities is a whole different word in Russian. But who can. Once again, he's being casual, just like Tucker is.
These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why?
Correct. If you can, you are capable, but once again, the translator is being very formal, and you can tell that Tucker's not being as formal, he's being casual about it. So is Putin, right? They're both being casual about it. I don't know, once again, if the translator was told that he should be more formal about it or not, but he's being extremely formal in everything that he's saying, or translating it as, when it doesn't come off that way. It's kind of, yeah, formalities, there you go, right? But they're both being very casual to each other.
Why wouldn't you
let's keep other politics out of the chat and just, once again, taking this information, right? Hopefully you're here to see another point of view. You're here to listen to what somebody else has to say and to make your own opinion about it, right? Don't attack each other in the chat. Everybody in here has a different opinion. I guarantee you every single one of the 800 people that are in here has a different opinion about something. So let's not focus on that. Just focus on the content. Focus on what is currently being said. And, you know, obviously you guys can comment about that and make your own opinions about that. But just don't bring other things into something that's totally unrelated.
Propaganda victory.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction. After all, it is not only about Nord Stream 1, which was blown up, and the Nord Stream 2 was damaged, but one pipe is safe and sound and gas can be supplied to Europe through it. But Germany does not open it. We are ready, please. There's another route through Poland called Yamal Europe, which also allows for large flow. Poland has closed it, but Poland packs from the German hand. It receives money from the pan-European funds, and Germany is the main donor to these pan-European funds. Germany feeds Poland to a certain extent, and they close their route to Germany. Why? I don't understand. Ukraine, to which the Germans supply weapons and give money. Germany is the second sponsor of the United States in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. There are two gas routes through Ukraine. They simply closed one route, the Ukrainians. Open the second route and please get gas from Russia. They do not open it. Why don't the Germans say, look guys, we give you money and weapons, open up the valve, please, let the gas from Russia pass through for us. We're buying liquefied gas at exorbitant prices in Europe, which brings the level of our competitiveness and economy in general down to zero. Do you want us to give you money? Let us have the decent existence. Make money for our economy, because this is where the money we give you comes from. They refuse to do so. Why? Ask them. That is what is like in their heads. Those are highly incompetent people.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, Can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side, do you think?
Послушайте, вы сказали, мир разделяется на...
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. A human brain is divided into two hemispheres.
одну сферу деятельности, другая более креативная.
One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. But it is still one and the same head. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion.
Устойчивым и
That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now.
журналистики, они как
But I think that thanks to honest journalism, this work is akin to work of the doctors. This could somehow be remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
Вы знаете, это одна из грубейших
You know,
стратегических
to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership.
доллар. Это основа основ могущества США.
The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power.
Печатать долларов, они
I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world.
по-моему, 3%, примерно 3-4, что ли. Вот, приемлемо для США абсолютно.
Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing.
Это
What does the
главное
debt of $33 trillion tell us about?
могущество США.
It is about the emission.
Как только политическое руководство приняло решение использовать доллар в качестве инструмента политической борьбы,
Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world.
поэтому американцы
As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power.
и огромные.
I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do
Даже
and a grave mistake.
сокращаются запасы доллара сейчас. Все смотрят на то, что происходит, да, и начинают искать возможности.
Look at what is going on in the world.
Но если в отношении
Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on
Okay, he didn't say that inflation in the US was minimal as a whole. He was saying inflation in the US is minimal, like regularly, like normally. How we're supposed to have it in the US, at least, is 2.5% a year. That's just baseline. So he's talking about it as a whole. He's not talking about last year. He's not talking about during COVID. He's talking about just as a whole, right? He's talking about the US dollar and the power it has globally as a whole, not about what's happening right now. And that's what he's saying in Russian. Not sure why they didn't translate that into, like, him talking about it as a whole, but once again.
transactions,
Things happen
freezing
in translation.
assets, etc., causes grave concern.
Yeah, 3 or 4%. Well, 2.5 to 3% is our normal. That's our normal every single year in the US. It's 2.5 to 3%.
And sends a signal to the whole world.
в России мы
What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros.
в наших расчетах с третьими странами. Значит,
US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar.
США приняли решение ограничить наши расчеты в долларах.
We had no such intention.
Полная дурь.
It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United
With how many questions I'm getting about this, yes, I speak Russian. Someone just said "Русские на месте," which means Russians, or like Russians in place, or like in the place they're supposed to be. In a sense, I really can't translate that properly. But yes, I do speak Russian. I can read Russian. I just can't type in Russian. I can't spell in Russian because I left I left Russia when I was 3. So yeah, it's been reading, learned it from my mom. Speaking in Russian, it was because my mom kept speaking to me in Russian throughout all these years, and I still speak to her in Russian. That's why I can understand what Putin's saying. That's why I can correct a couple things in terms of the translation, just because, like I said, it's the enunciation, right? It's about intent. In Russian, it's about intent. It's how, как строго ты что сказать? How can I say this? How it's not like angry, but it's like how authoritarian in a sense can you say, have you said something? And then it changes the entire translation in English.
States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%.
There we go. Yeah, tone. I don't know why that was, completely like just skipped my mind. But yes, tone. Tone. What tone do you say it in? That totally changes what a word means.
Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles, and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this?
Really quickly, I know I keep pausing, but a lot of things are coming up in chat that I want to talk about, especially because someone said, seems like a coffee chat rather than an interview. It literally is. They're both being extremely casual. It's like they're talking between friends. You understand? Like, nothing is being said in a tone that is argumentative. Nothing is being said in a tone that is authoritarian in any way. And everything is like, I respect you, you respect me, we're having a conversation. And that's why I'm enjoying this interview. And that's why I feel like a lot of people would benefit from watching this interview. Because it's very different from what you see on the news every day. And it's very, very different from what, at least the information that I've been given from Western media sources has been. And I like to see that because that means I can digest more information and then eventually make my own opinion about it after fact checking. And once again, most important thing, fact check the absolute hell out of everything that's being said here, but make sure that you retain the information so that you're able to then make your own opinion. Because forming your own opinion is literally, well, honestly, it is the definition of freedom, right? At the end of the day. And like I said, I'm still a little bit more biased to the US because I was raised here, but that's the definition of freedom, is you are taking everything in and you are making your own decision. You're making your own opinion. You're making your own experiences are being put into account when these topics are discussed. And thank you very much for the gift. Anyways, we're going to continue.
What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US.
But
You're killing it with your own hands.
I think that's I think that's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We're always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China.
Okay, to be fair, in this sense, and I've looked a lot into this on my own, there are investment companies based out of China, specifically Tencent. Like, for example, even if you use Discord, Tencent owns about 31% right now of Discord, which is an American company, right? So, to be fair, I know that what he just said was that there's limited involvement by Chinese companies in the West, but in all reality, when you look at the investment companies, the people that are putting money into it, it is a lot of China. And all this can be looked up and fact-checked. Please do so.
It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. One of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the US government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
No, Chad. If it was wondering, since apparently the entire chat just started, asking about me, because I opened my door and I was speaking to my parents. I was telling them that it's gonna be a little while longer until they can go to sleep. Anywho, we're finishing this interview though, one way or another. All right.
Сейчас скажу, но чтобы закончить предыдущий вопрос.
I will tell you, but let me finish the previous thought. We, together with my colleague and friend, President Xi Jinping, set a goal to reach $200 billion of mutual trade with China this year. We have exceeded this level. According to our figures, our bilateral trade with China totals already $230 billion, and the Chinese statistics says it is $240 billion. One more important thing, our trade is well balanced, mutually complementary in high-tech, energy, scientific research and development. It is very balanced. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022 it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now.
Okay, that's true in senses of the reason why they have such a high share now is because China is part of BRICS, right? So because China is exporting so many manufactured goods out to the rest of the world, of course their economy is growing rapidly. Their economy continues to grow, and because they're a part of BRICS, obviously the trade that they do within that environment of BRICS, of that BRICS alliance, is going to take out pretty much there is no competing with in terms of market share, right? In terms of economic volume, right? It's not profit or anything like that, but it's economic volume compared to obviously like the U.S. and its economy right now.
And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner.
For those of you unfamiliar with BRICS, BRICS is pretty much trying to get the dollar off of being the global reserve currency, right? BRICS is a alliance where they are trying to utilize reserve currencies that are anything but the dollar, in a sense, right? It's almost like the G7 countries, right? And BRICS, right? They're fighting all the time, pretty economically, right? But, and yes, they always did trade with each other. The difference is that now as an alliance, they're making up a certain percentage of total economic volume in the world, right? And then that's seen as a threat to the dollar. So, I mean, it's like, he's making some points here. Not everything is fact-checked here. I really implore everybody here to go do their own research. Like, really, like, go to YouTube, find this exact video, go step by step. Anything that you think is a little iffy, literally anything that smells a bit funny, go and look it up. Go and do your own research on it. Go to some forums, like, take in all the information that you can, and then make your own assumption and your own conclusion about it. And that's, like, the best thing that I can recommend for everyone here.
Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident. You just asked me if another leader comes and changes something. It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person. I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States, he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much. I assure you that this is not the case. I think he made a lot of mistakes with regard to Russia, too. I told you about 2008 and the decision in Bucharest to open the NATO's doors for Ukraine and so on. That happened during his presidency. He actually exercised pressure on the Europeans. But in general, on a personal human level, I had a very good relationship with him. He was no worse than any other American or Russian or European politician. I assure you, he understood what he was doing as well as others. I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader, it is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse. But if, in the end, one comes to the awareness that the world has been changing due to the objective circumstances, and that one should be able to adapt to them in time, using the advantages that the US still has today, then perhaps something may change. Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the 5th place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere.
Самое большое количество санкций в мире, которые применяются, это применяется против
The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia.
Инструменты,
And we have
которые-
become Europe's first economy during this time.
Но надо же подумать.
The tools that US uses don't work.
Вот если
Well, one has to think about what to do.
Okay, what he actually said here, and I don't know why the interviewer didn't actually, or not the interviewer, but the translator didn't actually say, was that he said within this time, even like, so Russia is the number one in having sanctions against it, and within this time, Russia has become the number one economy in Europe, is what Putin just said. Maybe it's delayed. I'm not sure. We're about to see, but I gave it a good like 5-10 seconds. I don't know why I didn't say that, but that's what Putin just said.
If this realization comes to the ruling elites, then yes, then the first person of the state will act in anticipation of what the voters and the people who make decisions at various levels expect from this person. Then maybe something will change.
Okay, never mind. The translator didn't translate that part at all. That's weird. That's the first time in this interview I can definitely say that there was something that was not translated at all.
You're describing two different systems. You say the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known...
He said it already? I heard Putin say it, and then nothing from... Okay, let's go back real quick. Just...
First economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of...
Oh, he's ahead. No, now he's ahead. You're right. You're right, chat. Yeah, no, now he's ahead. Okay, so before the translator was behind Putin in what he was saying, in terms of like Putin would say it and then the translator would say it. Now he's ahead of him. Okay, that caught me off a little bit. Okay.
The leader, they're
We're good.
made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
Я не знаю. Это Америка сложная страна, такая очень, с одной стороны, консервативная.
I don't know. America is a complex country, conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes the
Me too. Me too, bro.
decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself? Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it.
Есть две партии, в которых
Certainly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats. And within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions.
Потом смотрите,
Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think, among other things, because excessive production capacities were created.
Okay, so is it just me, or is that every single time the interview mentions election in any way, shape, or form, even if it's not a U.S. election, there's a button that pops up on the stream that says learn more about U.S. elections? Somebody at TikTok, can we get a comment about this, please? Because it's happened twice already. Anyways.
During the confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities, and to subdue them in a divided form, to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world. Look at how Indonesia is developing. 600 million people. Where can we get away from that? Nowhere. We just have to assume that Indonesia will enter, it is already in, the club of the world's leading economies, no matter who likes it or dislikes it. Yes, we understand and are aware that in the United States, despite all the economic problems, the situation is still normal, with the economy growing decently. The GDP is growing by 2.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But if we want to ensure the future, then we need to change our approach to what is changing. As I already said, the world would nevertheless change, regardless of how the developments in Ukraine end. The world is changing. In the United States themselves, experts are writing that the United States are nonetheless gradually changing their position in the world. It is your experts who write that. I just read them. The only question is how this would happen, painfully and quickly, or gently and gradually. And this is written by people who are not anti-American. They simply follow global development trends. That's it. And in order to assess them and change policies, we need people who think, look forward, can analyze and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders.
I just have to ask, you've said clearly that NATO expansion eastward is a violation of the promise you all were made in 1990. It's a threat to your country. Right before you sent troops into Ukraine, the Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
That's a good question.
I repeat once again, we have repeatedly proposed to seek a solution to the problems that arose in Ukraine after 2014 coup d'etat through peaceful means. But no one listened to us. And moreover, the Ukrainian leaders who were under the complete US control suddenly declared that they would not comply with the Minsk agreements. They disliked everything there and continued military activity in that territory. And in parallel, that territory was being exploited by NATO military structures under the guise of various personnel training and retraining centers. They essentially began to create bases there. That's all. Ukraine announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality, while passing the laws that limit the rights of non-titular nationalities in Ukraine. Ukraine, having received all these southeastern territories as a gift from the Russian people, suddenly announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality in that territory. Is that normal? All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a frontline soldier. I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. He talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine. He deceived his voters.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world? Can he do that, do you think?
Before he answers that, for everyone that is asking for captions, there is a feature on TikTok somewhere right over here, like in this general area that I'm like doing this at. There's like, you can turn your screen, right, like a YouTube video, and it'll be a bigger picture for y'all.
Ну, а почему нет? Он же
Why
считается
not?
главой государства.
He considers himself head of state. He won the elections. Although we believe in Russia that the coup d'etat is the primary source of power for everything that happened after 2014. And in this sense, even today, government is flawed. But he considers himself the president, and he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not? He can. We negotiated with Ukraine in Istanbul. We agreed. He was aware of this. Moreover, the negotiation group leader, Mr. Arahamiya is his last name, I believe still heads the faction of the ruling party, the party of the president in the Rada. He still heads the presidential faction in the Rada, the country's parliament. He still sits there. He even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia, and we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not? Further on, President of Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us. Let him cancel that decree, and that's it. We have never refused negotiations, indeed. We hear all the time, is Russia ready? Yes, we have not refused. It was them who publicly refused. Well, let him cancel his decree and enter into negotiations. We have never refused. And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, seems ridiculous and very sad to me. Because, as Mr. Arahamiya put it, we could have stopped those hostilities with war a year and a half ago already. But the British persuaded us and we refused this. Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
That's a good question. Where do you think he is, and why did he do that?
Hell knows. I don't understand it myself. There was a general starting point. For some reason, everyone had the illusion that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield. Because of arrogance, because of a pure heart, but not because of a great mind.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You've said you're orthodox. What does that mean?
Okay, really quickly, I just got to do it. Emily, thank you for Leon the Kitten and the Baby Dragon. Holy shit. This has been the biggest stream that I've ever done in my entire life. Thank you guys for being here and for watching this with me. Once again, keep your minds open. It doesn't matter where the information is coming from. Take it in. Go fact check the absolute hell out of it. And make sure you do so, right? You can find this on YouTube. You can find this on Rumble. You can find this on Kick. You can find this anywhere you want to find this. Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. Just make sure you make your own opinion. Don't just regurgitate information. Take it in, digest it, process it. That's it. Anyways, thank you guys.
For you, you're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know, as I already mentioned, in 988, Prince Vladimir himself was baptized following the example of his grandmother, Princess Olga. And then he baptized his squad. And then, gradually, over the course of several years, he baptized all the Rus. It was a lengthy process.
Really quickly, I do just want to say this part is going to be extremely interesting to me because I was baptized as a Russian Orthodox. So I don't know, it's interesting to hear about how this actually happened. Like, I am actually appreciating the fact that Putin is going into the history of Russia to then back up certain claims or then to, well, spin it in a certain way, because I know there's some things he said aren't really, but it's an interview that I have not seen before, especially in the way that it's currently being conducted, nor in the way that the answers are flowing, if that makes sense.
From pagans to Christians. It took many years. But in the end, this orthodoxy, Eastern Christianity, deeply rooted itself in the consciousness of the Russian people. When Russia expanded and absorbed other nations who profess Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, Russia has always been very loyal to those people who profess other religions. This is her strength. This is absolutely clear. And the fact is that the main postulates, main values are very similar, not to say the same, in all world religions I've just mentioned, and which are the traditional religions of the Russian Federation, Russia. By the way, Russian authorities were always very careful about the culture and religion of those people who came into the Russian Empire. This, in my opinion, forms the basis of both security and stability of the Russian statehood. All the peoples inhabiting Russia basically consider it their motherhood. If, say, people move over to you or to Europe from Latin America, an even clearer and more understandable example, people come, but yet they have come to you or to European countries from their historical homeland. And people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family. And our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family, but everyone has his, her own family. And this is the basis of our society.
Okay, one big thing about the translation here. He's saying родины, not семья. Семья is family. Родины is like, it would include not only like cousins, but like your cousin twice removed and then, put in a bush somewhere and that they're related to you in some way, shape, or form. Like, they are your people type of thing.
And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other, it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland. That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
But can I say that the one way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone.
That was a really weird question. Weird enough for me to need to hear it again. This is just like me personally, but...
The way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
That's a really weird question. That is a really, really weird question.
Очень легко. Если речь идет о защите себя и своей семьи.
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family,
С чего
one's homeland.
начались события?
We won't attack anyone.
С госпереворота и с начала боевых действий на Донецке.
When did the developments in Ukraine start?
На Донбассе. Вот с чего. И мы
Since the coup
защищаем
d'état and the hostilities in Donbas began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future.
Она не во внешних проявлениях, и в том, чтобы ходить
As for religion in general,
или бить головой в пол. Она в сердце.
you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человекоориентированная. И,
It is in the heart. And our culture is so human.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have to go back because banging your head on the floor, that's... I don't think he said that. I don't think that was translated.
It's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человекоориентированная. И,
It is in the heart. And our culture is so human-oriented.
гений.
No. It's not banging your head on the floor. Don't think that... It can be translated that way, but no. It's more like it's not about like placing your head on the floor. I have no other way to translate this other than placing your head on the floor. You know how anyways, you get it. But that banging your head on the floor, that's an interesting way to translate that.
Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul.
Русский человек, российский человек, он думает больше о вечном, он думает больше о ценностях.
After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think
I'm seeing a lot of questions on this. You guys can watch this on YouTube. This is on YouTube. Just look up Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin interview, and you will find it very quickly. It's a 2-hour-long interview. When we started watching this a couple hours ago, it had 1.8 million views. It now has 3.5 million views. This thing's blowing up everywhere, and you guys really should go watch it, fact check everything.
more about the
Make your own
eternal,
opinion.
about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all.
Возможность вот сегодняшнему этому золотому миллиарду.
I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on.
Что мы вроде как выглядим одинаково, но
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same, but our minds
So
are
do you
built a
see
little
the
different.
supernatural at work as you...
Look the same, but our minds
So
are
do
built
you
a
see
little
the
different.
supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not?
He said something there in that jumbled mess of like Tucker interrupting him that, or like I wouldn't even say interrupt, just kind of like cutting him off on a point, or maybe like speaking, maybe it was the translator that was speaking over everything, but he said something that wasn't translated and I can't really tell what it was, but
In the world now, do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself,
Okay, never mind.
these are
Let's
forces
move
that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что
No, to be honest, I don't
мировое
think
сообщество
so.
развивается вот по своим внутренним
My opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws
yeah, I also speak Russian. That's why I was trying to like hear what they were saying, but the translator spoke over what they didn't translate, which was a little weird.
are what they are.
Так было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind. Some nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to.
Наверное, не нужно приводить эти примеры, но начиная
There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors.
There is a non-translated version, but it is uploaded by Russian media, so it like starts at a really weird time frame. I think my mom found it and she was watching it. But you definitely can find it, but you have to search for it in Russian.
The Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire.
человечество каждый
It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind.
This is about Ukraine. All of this is about, well, technically supposed to be about Ukraine.
варваров постепенно накапливался.
Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and begun to develop economically, as we would say today.
Экономически они стали укрепляться.
This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans.
500 лет. Этот процесс.
However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart.
В сегодняшней ситуации
The difference with what is happening now
процессы изменений
is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
What was that?
Are
That is the
happening
weirdest. That is the weirdest cut I've ever seen.
at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
That just me, chat?
У меня все в более
You're
сложные.
asking
just
increasingly
me?
more complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big numbers, big data, and AI. Mankind is currently facing many threats. Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
Илон Маск внедрил уже чип в мозг какого-то человека.
What do you think of that?
Ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска
Well, I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. Nevertheless, you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий. В генетике, либо
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics
Поэтому
or in AI.
вот
One can
тогда,
make
когда
an approximate
человечество
prediction of what will
почувствовало
happen.
угрозу своему существованию от ядерного оружия, все начали обладатели ядерного
Once
оружия начали
mankind
между собой
felt an
договариваться.
existential
Потому
threat
что
coming
понимали,
from
что
nuclear
их
weapons,
неаккуратное применение
all
может
nuclear
привести
nations began to
к
come to
полному
terms with one another since
Когда,
they realized
наступит
the
понимание того,
negligent
что,
use of nuclear weaponry
беспредельное,
could drive
бесконтрольное
humanity to
развитие
extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые невозможно.
It is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя,
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
мы столько сделали жестов.
Okay. Now it's getting weird. Because you don't do that in an interview. Yeah, I'll go back here because this is really weird. You don't do this in an interview at all. Like it's almost like breaking character.
Wall Street Journal reporter, he's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency...
As a sign of your decency. I'm surprised Tucker got out of there alive. At that point right there. As a sign of your decency. That translator must have said it in a different way than how Tucker actually said it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. That is...
You would be willing to...
Imagine like somebody coming into your house and being like, as a sign of your decency, because he's in the Kremlin right now, like just somebody coming into your house, like in the U.S., like, as a sign of your decency, do you mind, let's say, letting that one dog that you caught in your yard go, right? As a sign of your decency, though, right? I don't know, something stupid, but as a sign of your decency.
Release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил.
That is what he said.
Но
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner.
что мы
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that
не исключаем того, что мы можем это
if our
сделать
partners
при
take reciprocal steps.
встречном движении со стороны наших
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services.
представителей специальных служб.
Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
На то, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this
Мы
issue.
готовы ее решать.
We are willing to solve
Там
it.
есть определенные условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services
по
channels.
партнерским каналам между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody.
Okay, to be fair, Tucker, in this regard, I'm gonna have to disagree with him. Who knows? I'm just saying, we don't have access to any documents. We don't have access to anything classified. Who knows? Right? Neither does he. That's not fact that he's saying anymore. He's been saying factual things or asking questions where they can be responded to with fact. In this case, he's asking questions that... Imagine asking the President of the United States the same questions. They'd be like, that's classified. Point blank, period.
But he knows that, and he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else.
It's a lot of speculation. Like phrasing a question in a way that you are already speculating on something to be true for it to be answered. And then if they do answer it in the way you want it, you want someone to answer it, then it can be taken as fact, is not a true question.
In exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
It's a bait. It's like a trap.
Вы знаете, можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что не шпион.
You can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy, but there are certain things provided by law. If person gets secret information and does that in conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative. Considering the sheer fact, this is qualified as espionage. The fact has been proven, as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you...
Yeah, so, like I said, technically, you go to a foreign country, you gain resources, even as a reporter, especially as a Western reporter, you go into that country and you get someone to give you confidential information that is like confidential information by the government, like top secret shit. And then to make, even if it's for a news story, even in the United States, you'd be charged with espionage for that. So I don't know exactly the whole thing about that entire thing, but that's interesting. If Tucker right now asks what the confidential information was, it's going to be a little off
Are you
as well.
suggesting that he was working for the US government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторяю еще раз.
I don't know who
Получение
he was
секретной
working for,
информации конспиративно
but I would like to
основанной
reiterate that
там
getting
работал
classified
если
information
спецслужб,
in
каких-то
secret
других структур,
is called
я не думаю, что он
espionage,
работал на Монако,
and he was working for the US Special Services, some other agencies.
Вот, ну,
I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information.
есть
It is up to special services to come to an agreement.
по нашему мнению не связаны.
Some groundwork has been laid. There are people who, in our view, are not connected with special services.
Соединенных Штатов.
Let me tell you a story about a person serving a sentence in an allied country.
Okay, before they even get into that story, like I said, Russia, China, America, anywhere that you go, and you're a reporter from another country, and you go and get classified information, even for a news story, and then that goes somewhere, you're getting charged for espionage. No matter where you are. I just find it really weird that the fact that the line of questioning is going towards that specific reporter over and over again. And Tucker Carlson made it out of the interview. I'm just saying. It's weird. I don't know if it's pre-planned. I don't know what's going on here. But it's like they totally squirreled from the general topic of the Ukraine war and like the history of Russia and everything. And now it's just all about some weird espionage case.
Of the US.
Соображений ликвидировал в
That
одной из
person, due to
европейских столиц
patriotic sentiments, eliminated a bandit in one of the European capitals.
во время событий на Кавказе. Знаете, что
During the events in the Caucasus, do you know what he was doing?
хочется говорить, но тем не менее скажу.
I don't want to say that, but I will do it anyway. He was laying our soldiers, taken prisoner, on the road and then drove his car over their heads. What kind of person is that?
И человек.
Can he even be called human?
Нашелся патриот, который ликвидировал его в одной из европейских столиц.
But there was a patriot who eliminated him in one of the European
По собственной
capitals.
инициативе или нет,
Whether he did it of his own volition or not, that is a different question.
Yeah, but Evan
Вот он-
Gershkovich
вот
didn't
он-
do that. I mean, that's a completely different. I mean, yeah, but Evan
Вот он-
Gershkovich
вот- вот
didn't
он-
do that. I mean,
Or not,
What are you saying?
that is a different question.
yeah, but Evan
Вот он-
Gershkovich
вот- вот
didn't
он-
do that. I mean, that's a complete.
What did he say? Yeah, but what didn't do that? It's not in here either. It's not like in the captions.
That is a different question.
Yeah, but Evan
вот он- вот
Gershkovich
он-
didn't.
вот он
Ethnic Christians? What do you say, chat? Oh, the reporter's name. Eric. Oh, I see. Okay, I
That,
got
I
you.
mean, that's a completely different. I mean, this is a
Да, он не-
32-year-old like
ну, он
newspaper
делал- да,
reporter.
He committed
делал
something
другое.
different.
Да, он не просто журналист. Я повторяю еще раз, это журналист.
He's
который
not
получил
just a
секретную
journalist.
информацию на
I
конспиративных
reiterate, he's a journalist who was secretly giving
Я
confidential
просто говорю про
information.
тех людей, которые
Yes, it is different, but still, I'm talking about other people who are essentially controlled by the US authorities, wherever they are serving a sentence.
идет диалог.
There is an ongoing dialogue between the special services. This has to be resolved in a calm, responsible, and professional manner. They are keeping in touch, so let them do their work.
Тот человек, о котором вы сказали, господин,
I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovich, may return to his motherland.
в тюрьме в России.
By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia. We want the US Special Services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals our special services are pursuing.
Те проблемы,
We are ready to talk.
перед нашими
Moreover, the talks are underway. And there have been many successful examples of these talks crowned with success.
договаривались.
Probably this is going to be crowned with success as well,
Но только надо договариваться.
but we have to come to an agreement.
I hope you let him out. Mr. President, thank you.
Yes, there is a quote-unquote raw one that was live streamed, I think, by Russian state media, but like I said, you're gonna have to search for it in Russian. Probably gonna have to use a Russian VPN to even find it, because I wasn't even able to find it. I think my mom found it on YouTube somewhere, but like I said, you're gonna have to search for it in Russian.
I also want him to return to his homeland at last. I'm absolutely sincere. But let me say once again, the dialogue continues. The more public we render things of this nature, the more difficult it becomes to resolve them. Everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's true with the war, though. Also, I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? And how motivated are you just to call the US government and say, let's come to terms?
I already said that we did not refuse to talk. We are willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. It is evident. I do not want you to take it as if I'm looking for a strong word or an insult, but we both understand what is happening. The financial support, 72 billion US dollars, was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come. Dozens of billions of US dollars are going to Ukraine. There's a huge influx of weapons. In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree. We did not refuse.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult, because you already said correctly, it's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Okay, Tucker just essentially indirectly called Ukraine a puppet of the US. That's interesting. Once again, do your own research. Take that information in. Do what you will with it. Either throw it out if you think it's BS. Research it if you want to know more about it. But form your own opinion before saying anything.
Well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out. It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is it. However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of the situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature, and then he himself said, "We were ready to sign it, and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance." Well, you missed it, you made a mistake. Let them get back to that, that is all. Why do we have to bother ourselves and correct somebody else's mistakes? I know one can say it is our mistake. It was us who intensified the situation and decided to put an end to the war that started in 2014 in Donbas, as I have already said, by means of weapons. Let me get back to furthering history. I already told you this. We were just discussing it. Let us go back to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state. Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. It is pointless though, isn't it? We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stopped negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
Я же сказал.
I said, let them think how to do it with dignity. There are options if there is a will.
Варианты есть. Но если такое желание.
Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield.
Стратегического поражения России, поражения на
Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all. In my opinion, it is impossible by definition. It is never going to happen. It seems to me that now, those who are in power in the West have come to realize this as well.
это осознание пришло. Подумайте теперь.
If so, if the realization has set in, they have to think what to do next. We are ready for this dialogue.
Would you be willing to say, congratulations, NATO, you won, and just keep the situation where it is now?
Ну, вы знаете, это предмет переговоров.
You know, it is a subject matter for the
Whoever just noticed that I was bobbing my head up and down. Yeah, I do that whenever I'm actually listening to someone. I have ADHD, so I got to do something. And the best way for me to express like I'm listening is bobbing my head up and down. For whoever said, how do I know Russian? I was born in Russia, raised in Texas, so I speak Russian at home.
negotiations no one is willing to conduct, or, to put it more accurately,
Точнее сказать, хотят.
they are willing but do not know how to do it.
Я не только вижу,
I know they want
я
to.
знаю, что
It is not just I see it, but I know they do want it. But they are struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that. It is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how to reverse the situation. We're not against it. It would be funny if it were not so sad.
Да, было бы смешно, если бы не было так грустно.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Истерика,
Let me finish out these last 2 minutes, Q, and then I'll answer your questions.
там внутренние проблемы.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation,
Все равно мы договоримся. И
but the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway.
в сегодняшней ситуации прозвучит.
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
Между народами восстановится. Потребуется много времени.
I'll give you very unusual examples.
Совсем приведу вам необычный пример.
There is a combat encounter on the battlefield. Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life. Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive."
Наши солдаты им кричат.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying,
Вдруг оттуда
"Russians, do not surrender."
хорошем русском
And all of them
и
perished.
не сдаются.
They still identified themselves as Russian.
Они до сих пор русскими себя ощущают. В этом смысле то, что
What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war. Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever.
растащили
No,
одну
they
часть.
will be reunited.
Нет,
The unity is still there.
воссоединение произойдет. Оно никуда и не делось.
Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Русскую православную церковь.
because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President.
That was a very interesting interview. If you guys have been here since the start, that, once again, an interview that I have never before seen. It was very raw. There was one part where it looks like it might have been edited, maybe, but everything else felt very, very fluid. Everything was very casual. And you got to kind of see two sides. You got to see both sides of the conflict. You got to see both sides of the mindsets, that each side brings to the table. And I implore you guys to go and watch this on your own and really digest and process it and make your own opinions about it, because once again, and I've said this before in the stream, and I'll say it again, I truly believe that true freedom is the ability to form your own opinion. Not just take something from someone and, vomit it back out at somebody else. Truly take something in, take multiple different opinions in, digest them, process them, and then make your own opinion about it. So, you can find this on YouTube, you can find this on X, you can find this on pretty much any platform. Just look up Tucker Carlson interviews Putin, it's something like that. And, yeah, well, like I said, it's never happened before. A Western media group, whether it be Tucker Carlson or whoever, interviewing a Russian president. It just doesn't happen. And with all that being said, it is 4 o'clock in the morning for me. I was not expecting this to go this long. We've always been streaming for about, 3 hours and 20 minutes. The post that I made about this has gotten over 250,000 views over the 3 hours that I've been streaming this. 23,000 people have tuned into the stream. It's definitely by far one of my largest streams ever in my entire streaming career, history. I don't even know what to call it anymore. If you guys enjoyed the content, you guys want to see it again, hit that follow button. Join the Discord if you guys are new, discord.gg/TimothyD, aka discord.gg/ my username on TikTok. Make sure you do it on a regular browser, not a TikTok browser. I don't know why, but TikTok's really weird about all that. And with all that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Holy shit, Riley with the mystery fireworks. Thank you very much, by the way, everyone, for the gifts as well. Y'all absolutely are... Y'all are just freaking insane. Good vibes. Thank you for the 14 finger hearts. You guys have a great rest of your night. I'll see you guys in the next one. And by the way, let me know if you like this content, if you guys want to see more of it, because honestly, I really enjoy it. I like using my brain. Honestly, I quit my regular job because I didn't like being at the end of the day, like almost like a support tech type person where I was just answering emails all the time. I like using my brain. I like strategizing, right? I like doing things like this. I like talking. I like speaking. So let me know if you guys enjoyed this content, and I'll definitely do more of it. And once again, thank you guys so freaking much. You guys have a great freaking night. And I'll leave for a couple seconds because I know some people are delayed, but I'm going to turn my camera off. See you guys in the next one. And for those of you saying that you missed the beginning, really quick. For the people that are saying you missed the beginning, tomorrow I might replay some of it. Just a little bit. A little bit, not a lot. Not going to go through the whole 2 hour thing again, but maybe just the beginning or something like that. So if you guys do want to drop a follow, I got you. And I'm also going to like edit up my own version of this and my responses to them and etc. And I'll post certain parts. But anyways, once again, have a good night, guys.